Hey guys, Mr. Happy here, and welcome to my guide for the boss of the final Coil of Bahamut Turn 2, Kaliya. This guide is a collaboration between myself and the free company Death and Taxes. Before fighting this boss, you must first have cleared the final Coil of Bahamut Turn 1, and I recommend an average item level of 110 to 115. The fight with Kaliya consists of 3 phases persisting for the percentages shown on the screen right now. If you would like to skip to a specific phase, please click on the phase you'd like to skip to now, or use the annotations in the top left of the video at any point. I have also included Kaliya's ability rotation in a Google document in the description of the video. Kaliya's first phase will last from 100% until 60% of her HP. During this phase, she will have a number of attacks that shouldn't pose too much of a threat to your group if handled properly. First of all of Kaliya's auto attacks will cleave on her target. On top of this, she has an ability called Resonate, which is the equivalent to the Hydra's Triumvirate, dealing damage in a cone in front of Kaliya that is split between every player hit. Both of your tanks can pretty much just stand in front of Kaliya all the time in order to split the damage, or your off tank can get used to the timing and move in and out to take the hit. In the first phase, this isn't even necessary, as good cooldown usage and healing can actually handle the attack on a single tank, but it doesn't hurt to practice for later phases. Her next attack is Nerve Gas. Kaliya will occasionally use this attack 3 times in succession, breathing in a different spot each time. She has 3 predetermined directions she can breathe in as seen in the video, though the order in which she uses them is random. She can only breathe in each direction once, so players need to anticipate the breath and be ready to move out of each one. Being hit by Nerve Gas does high damage as well as inflicts a stacking vulnerability up debuff. Kaliya's next mechanic is her Seeds. These are basically the same things as homing missiles and gaseous bombs from turn 8. Seed of the Sea will mark a player with a gaseous bomb symbol and after a short delay, deal damage in a large AoE that is split between all the players hit. Seed of the Rivers will hit 2 random players other than the main tank with an AoE for a few thousand damage. So for Seed of the Sea, players need to stack up and split the damage, and for Seed of the Rivers, players need to spread out. When Kaliya deploys her seeds, she will always deploy them back to back. However, the order in which they fire is random, so you will either need to stack up and then spread out, or spread out and then stack up. Seed of the Sea is easy to notice due to the mark above a player's head, but Seed of the Rivers has no such marker. For this reason, players should be watching Kaliya's firing animation alongside looking for the Seed of the Sea marker. If she fires and there's no mark, you know it's Seed of the Rivers first. Shortly into the fight, Kaliya will summon a barrow field under her hitbox that will remain there for the rest of the fight. If a player steps into the barrow field, they will take some damage and gain a stacking vulnerability up debuff. This is here strictly to prevent players from running through Kaliya to dodge Nerve Gas, and forces you to instead rotate around her to dodge the attack. Kaliya's final mechanic for this phase is Secondary Head. Occasionally, Kaliya will stun her current tank and begin casting Secondary Head. When it finishes casting, it will hit the stunned tank and give them increased vulnerability to her primary head attack, which comes out immediately after Secondary Head. If the tank with Secondary Head debuff eats the primary head, they will die. To counter this, while Kaliya is readying Secondary Head, have the off tank provoke Kaliya and draw aggro. This will cause the off tank to eat the primary head in place of the main tank. Keep in mind this attack still hits hard, so preparing for the hit as the off tank with cooldowns, Stone Skin, and Eloquium is recommended. Continue handling these mechanics until Kaliya hits 60% HP. At 60%, Kaliya will deploy Emergency Mode. This will cause her to run to the middle of the room and summon a large barrier. If a player touches this barrier, they will instantly die, so when she is about to transition into phase 2, ensure you aren't near the center of the room. She will also summon 3 untargetable Allegan nodes, which will shoot lasers at players for the entirety of phase 2, as well as emit a small amount of raid-wide damage every few seconds. They hit extremely hard with their lasers, so be sure to avoid them. At the same time, she will summon 3 targetable nodes, a weapons node, a gravity node, and an electric node. They will spawn on the location seen on this image right here. If the nodes are ever too close to one another, they will form a tether between them and after a short delay, absorb each other and create a super node that will wipe the raid. Each node has specific attacks and rules it follows. First, we'll discuss the electric node. This node does not auto attack and cannot be tanked or moved willingly. It will occasionally hover counterclockwise around the arena, forcing the other 2 nodes to be moved occasionally to prevent them from getting too close to each other. The electric node's only attack is Forked Lightning, which is an exact copy of Thunderstruck from turn 9. You handle it the same way, have whoever gets the debuff ensure they are not standing next to anyone when the debuff wears off. This node also emits a field around it that makes it immune to all damage. The only way to damage the node is to attack it while standing within melee range. This gives you the debuff Energy Field Down and makes the node damageable. The Gravity node is the next one. Unlike the electric node, this one must be tanked. It has auto attacks that cleave near the tank, so whoever is taking it should keep it facing away from other nearby players. It should be noted that this node critically hits very often, so awareness is very useful here. This node's HP is significantly lower than the other two nodes, but it takes reduced damage from physical attacks. It also occasionally places a Void Zone AoE under a random player in the raid that must be moved out of and avoided. If a player stands in it, they will take damage and have their movement speed reduced. I recommend having one caster DPS, one tank, and one healer handle killing the Gravity node. The final enemy is the Weapons node. This one must be tanked and has a similar auto attack to the Gravity node, though it doesn't crit as often. It has much higher HP than the Gravity node, but takes reduced damage from magical attacks. The Weapons node's special attack is Repelling Cannons, which deals extremely high damage that must be split by players standing by the node. For this reason, it's recommended the remaining 5 players not assigned to the Gravity node be in charge of killing the Weapons node. Keep in mind that it is possible to hit the Gravity node while standing next to the Weapons node if tanked properly, so you may also want to consider having the extra caster DPS stand with the Weapons node group while DPSing the Gravity node to split the damage further. There is one final rule between the Gravity node and the Weapons node. When one dies, the other one will immediately rush to the electric node and attempt to be absorbed. If successful, it will cause a wipe, so you'll want to coordinate killing the Gravity and Weapons node first and at the same time, before moving as a unit of 8 to the electric node. This phase lasts until all 3 nodes are killed, or after about 2.5 minutes. If the nodes aren't killed by the phase's end, they will initiate an attack that will instantly wipe the raid. Upon the phase ending, the 3 untargetable nodes in the barriers will explode in an AoE before Kaliya unleashes her Nerve Cloud attack. This will hit everyone in the raid for extremely high damage and it will always critically hit, so mitigations such as Sucker, Stone Skin, and Sacred Soil are mandatory here. This will mark the end of Phase 2. Phase 3 will last until Kaliya's death, and is largely similar to Phase 1. Kaliya still has her Barrow Field, Secondary Head, Nerve Gas, and her Seeds, but additionally she has a new attack and some buffs. Going into this phase, Kaliya will absorb some of the powers from the nodes in Phase 2. This includes a stacking damage buff that will start at 1 stack, as well as the electric node's energy field. This means that for the remainder of the fight, Kaliya can only be damaged by players standing within melee range of her. The stacking damage buff will also be increased if Kaliya manages to kill a player with Primary Head. Kaliya's new attack in this phase is called Nanospore Jets. When she begins casting this, 4 tethers will target players in the raid. 2 of them will be black, and 2 of them will be white. When the cast is finished, the players tethered to Kaliya will instead become tethered to each other, depending on the color of their tether. The 2 people with black tethers to Kaliya will become tethered to each other, and the 2 people with white tethers to Kaliya will become tethered to each other. These tethers have several restrictions that must be followed. First, if either of the 2 tethered players die, the other will die shortly after. Second, the tethered players must not move too far away from each other. Moving too far will cause both players to take some damage and receive a stacking vulnerability up debuff. Moving even farther than this will cause both players to instantly die. The final rule is that the players with different colored tethers must stay away from one another. If someone with a black tether gets too close to someone with a white tether, it will have the same effect as moving too far away from your tethered partner, dealing damage and inflicting vulnerability up. It should be noted that these tethers do have somewhat of a pattern that they follow. First, the 2 tanks will only ever be tethered to each other. Second, if you have 2 melee DPS, they will only ever be tethered to each other. And finally, ranged DPS and healers can only be tethered to each other unless you only have 1 melee DPS. Of course, having deaths that alter these numbers can throw it off entirely. Due to these patterns, you assign places where players with certain tethers will always stand, regardless of who they're attached to. If the tanks get one set of tethers, everyone else, including the other set of tethered players, should move to the boss's 6 o'clock position while the tanks sit at the 12 o'clock position. If two sets of DPS or healers get tethers, one set will go to the 3 o'clock position and the other to the 9 o'clock position. We had the black tethers go to 3 o'clock and the white tethers go to 9 o'clock. From this point on, it becomes about handling the tethers properly while dealing with Kaliya's other attacks. The most difficult attacks to deal with are her seeds and nerve gas. For Kaliya's seeds, the same rules still apply. You either need to stack up and then spread out, or spread out then stack up. However, due to the positioning of tethered players being very important, there are some more stipulations. First, tethered players must still spread out just in case they both receive Seed of the Rivers. It takes some practice, but they can spread out enough to avoid sharing the splash damage without moving so far that they start receiving vulnerability upstacks. 2. You'll want DPS spreading out within melee range if possible to ensure they can keep damaging her. If not possible, have one DPS move out. You should still be able to beat the enrage timer. And finally, when Seed of the Sea is going out and the tethered players are at 3 and 9 o'clock, the remaining untethered players must be ready to move to one of the two tethered groups to stack depending on who gets the mark. That's it for Kaliya's seeds, so the last attack you'll have to adjust for is Nerve Gas. Unlike in phase 1 where Kaliya would always face the tanks when doing this attack, she can choose to turn and face a random party member to do her frontal Nerve Gas instead. This can cause panic if the tethered players aren't in agreement about which way to dodge, so to help with that, here are a few tips. If you're positioned for the tank tethers, whichever tether group gets targeted first should move to the right and then back left into their initial position. The other group can then dodge the two remaining breaths without worry. For the 3 and 9 o'clock tethers, you can follow the above rule if one of the two tethered groups is targeted. However, if the tanks are targeted, then the shortest distance dodge for either of the tethered groups should be to the boss's front where he just did his initial breath. The other group that's in the safe zone currently should rotate away from the boss's front to give the other tethered group more space. One last useful tip, when you're standing in the safe zone on breaths 2 or 3 and the other group is moving to dodge a nerve gas, move to the very edge of your safe zone in the opposite direction. This ensures the two groups don't get too close while rotating to dodge nerve gas. And finally, every 2 sets of tethers, Kaliya will use Nerve Cloud again, though it won't critically hit this time. Just mitigate this as you would any other raid-wide damage and you should be fine. Kaliya has an enrage of 11 minutes, so be sure to maximize damage wherever possible. This fight is mostly about mastering the tether mechanic, especially alongside Nerve Gas, and will most likely be what troubles most groups. Just keep at it and eventually you will win and move on to the final Coil of Bahamut turn 3. Thank you for watching this guide. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share for more Final Fantasy XIV videos, guides, whatever. And until next time guys, take care.